Hello, welcome. So here are some quick details about this painting. The reference photo for this painting came from the website Paint My Photo from the user Aschi, and it is labeled as Blue Tip 57. I used Dr. P.H. Martin's Bombay Ink and M. Graham and Daniel Smith watercolors on handmade watercolor paper. If you are just here to watch a speed painting, please go ahead and hit mute, increase the speed, and put on your favorite music. So the book I was listening to while I painted this piece was the Risdaverse Tales by Ruby Dixon. I did listen to it on audiobook. I have read all of these novellas previously, but I was listening to it while I painted this. So it is a collection of 4 novellas, including The Alien's Mail Order Bride, When She's Married, Pretty Human, and When She's Bold. So first disclaimer, I am a fan of science fiction, and sci-fi romance is my absolute favorite genre. I have read most of what Ruby Dixon has written, and I like most of it. I do read other forms of literature, but honestly, it's not as fun to talk about, and no one in my real life has read these books. And I just wanted a platform to kind of talk about and discuss my feelings and thoughts on these books and just, you know, what I think and have some conversation and dialogue about it. So here I am. Second disclaimer, I am not a professional book critic, far from it. And while I respect and watch a lot of professional book critics, and yes, I am including many of the people on YouTube as professionals, because when people can make 3-hour long videos analyzing books, I consider them professionals. And that's just not me. I'm just here to give my opinion and talk about the stories in general. Third disclaimer, there will be some spoilers and a trigger warning talking about trauma resulting from being held captive / owned. So just take that into consideration. If that's not for you, but you still want to see the painting, like I said, just go ahead and mute me, put on some music, because I really do think this is a pretty nice painting. So let's talk about the Alien's Mail Order Bride. So this was not my favorite story in this collection, and it's definitely not my favorite story in the Risdaverse Tales, but it is a slower burning story, especially in the whole Rubyverse, and it is a pretty good story overall. I do like the female protagonist a lot, and I think it's an important story because it is one of the first in the Risdaverse Tales. Now, technically, it doesn't take place on Risda 3, but it is one of the first stories that take place outside of the ice planet, which means we get a love story that doesn't involve biologically selected mates. So woohoo! But anyway, let's jump into the plot summary. So this is kind of for anyone that has not read this story, but is kind of familiar the Ice Planet Barbarian universe in general. So here we go. When the story opens, we meet Emvor, and he's a Masaka, which is an alien race that is 7 feet tall, blue skin, black hair, has horns and a tail. It's the same alien race that are in the Ice Planet Barbarian series, just without the whole Kui symbiont. And Emvor is a former soldier that has retired to a sparsely populated farming planet called Casa. He's a loner that's looking for a wife. Specifically, he is looking to obtain a wife through a mail order bride agency, and he's arranged to have that happen. And he's specifically looking for a mail order bride because A, he lives in the middle of nowhere, and B, because he's really scarred up from the war and he thinks that no one could love him unless he paid for them. And when the story opens, we see that he's at the spaceport on Casa waiting to pick up his new bride. Emvor doesn't want anyone in the town to know why he's in the spaceport, so he's kind of trying to keep his business on the down low, trying to keep himself to himself so none of his neighbors know what he's doing there. And as Emvor waits, we get this huge info dump about why he wants a wife, and pretty much he needs a farmhand. But he is also a very lonely man, so he figures that a female Misaka wife solves both of these problems because even female Misakas are very strong, and so it's a 2-for-1 situation right there. And Emvor was just injured when he fell off the roof, and now he's kind of scared that if he gets injured again and he's alone, it might prove fatal. So a wife he must have, that's his solution. Now, there's other possible options and other possible solutions to this problem. There's robots that are known as farm mechs, but Emvor doesn't trust him. Farmhands, can't sleep with them. A life alert bracelet, never heard of it. We have spaceships in this world, but we don't have that kind of technology. So finally, Emvor sees his bride Shirari, and he notices a couple of things about her. First, she is covered in very long robes, complete with a hood and gloves, which he thinks is kind of odd because it's a super hot day. And second, that she takes extremely small steps, especially for a Masaka. And then he sees her face and he describes it as really super bland with a very dead expression. He's like, he just doesn't read anything on it. So pretty much, Shirari is a perfect example of a CIA gray man. But Ember just, he's like, well, I didn't marry her for looks, so it doesn't matter. But Emvor takes Shiari home and he suggests that maybe she would like to change out of her super warm robes, and she agrees and he shows her to the bedroom where she can change. But there's no door on the bedroom jamb because Emvor says he lives alone. And I'm like, is this really a thing though? Because I've lived alone plenty in my life and I've always, always had a door on my bedroom, even no matter where I've lived and when I've lived alone. But anyway, he goes out to make her some tea, let her get changed, but he kind of continues to think that there's things are not adding up. So he decides to sneak up on her and watch her change. And he sees her take off her shoes, which are these really tall platforms. And then she removes some shoulder pads, and he sees now that the clothes she's wearing are actually super big on her. They don't fit her at all. So he asks her, he's like, "Who are you?" And she's super startled and she gasps. And when she turns around, her face shimmers because, surprise, surprise, she's wearing a hollow mask. So she removes the mask, and to his surprise, she has pale gold colored hair, beige colored skin with very flat features. So now his question is, what are you? And she responds, I am human, and you can call me Nicola. So this is where we meet Nicola, aka Shirari. Pretty much Nicola was stolen from Earth when she was 12, and she was illegally sold to an elderly Masaka lady named Lilandra, who kept her as a pet for 12 years. She explains to Emvor that Lilandra was dying, and she was the one that came up with the plan for her to pretend to be Shirari and to marry someone on a distant planet and get pregnant, have some babies, and that way Nicola could be protected from the authorities and could be confiscated and sold into research or a private zoo or a brothel. And I'm not quite sure how this protects humans in this universe, but I guess if you marry a Masaka and have kids with them, you kind of become a citizen or something, because this is a reoccurring theme and you see this in most of the stories. Anyway, needless to say, Emvor is not having this. He is not happy about being lied to. He calls Nicola a runt and pretty much tells her that she is useless to him. Nicole is like, but wait, I grew up on a farm on Earth. I've read all about what you do here. I know what your operation is, and I can work hard. And look, I don't want to end up in a brothel, so like I can just stay here. I'll still do everything we agreed to. I'll be your wife. I'll work on this farm. I'll have your babies. I've been taking all kinds of hormones. And Emor is like, nope, you're weak. You can't haul hay, so no. And Nicole is like, yeah, but wait. There are robots for that. But we know that Emvor hates the robots. He doesn't trust them because he already told us that. We got the info dump. So he says, look, Nicola, you can stay the night and until we figure out what I'm going to do with you, you can stay the night. And he goes out, he goes off and works in the barn. And Nicole is like, well, I'm going to make him dinner. So she makes him dinner. He loves it. She doesn't uses the food processor. She actually makes everything from scratch. So everything tastes really good. And he lets her sleep in the house. He sleeps in the barn. She cries herself to sleep. It's kind of sad. But since Emvor makes it clear that he doesn't want Nicole as a wife, she convinces him to help her find a husband within this community on this planet at the next communal gathering. And the rest of the story is pretty much Nicola putting up with Emvor's moods while cooking and cleaning for him, while he pouts every time she brings up the fact that she needs a husband. And I'm not going to ruin the end for you, but if you have read Ruby's works before, you might be able to guess what happens. All right, so I do have to say, so this is trigger warning, because in this fictional universe, humans are kidnapped from Earth. They are sold into slavery by several different alien races. So the next part is going to talk about how the main female character was kidnapped and sold as a pet to an alien in this fictional universe. I liked Nicola. I thought she was an interesting character, and I liked that she had her own agency. She is the first character we have in this universe that was kept as a pet rather than as a plaything or a mistress. But Nicola is still a victim, but she's traumatized differently than other characters in the series. She actually says she loves the Masaka woman, Lilandra, who bought her, but Nicola says she loves her because she taught her how to speak the Masakan language and taught her how to play sticks, which is a game favored by the Masakan people. And Nicola does acknowledge that Lilandra would always talk down to her and she would smack her on occasion. She wouldn't let her go outside. But in the end, Lilandra helped Nicola come up with this whole plan to have some kind of life, some kind of autonomy. Well, I guess as much as she can have in this universe. And I think it's hard to read Nicola defend Lilandra when Nicola is so obviously a victim. And we as readers are agreeing with Emvor that Lilandra is a monster. And I think it's really easy to kind of, when you're reading this, to think, no, Nicola, you need to hate Lilandra. Like, Lilandra's evil. And that Lilandra should never have owned anyone, let alone a 12-year-old child. However, I do think it's very nuanced writing that Ruby does when she wrote Nicola, because Nicola doesn't really excuse Lilandra's actions. And I think the fact that Nicola has love for her is a way of dealing with her trauma. Obviously, because Nicola was so young and reads as a character that is very practical. She we see that she has accepted the rules of this universe and is playing within them. So she probably accepted the fact that she was not going back to Earth pretty quickly after she was taken from Earth. So she probably started to see Lilandra as a substitute mother figure, and that could probably explain the complex emotions around how she feels about this woman who owned her. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into that. Let me know what you think. Anyway, although her goal was to find a husband for safety, Nicola wasn't waiting around for it to happen. She was an active participant in the search, and she was making things happen for herself. And I think that's a grand departure from a lot of the plot beats in the Ice Planet Barbarian novels. And it was something new to see. I think this is why I enjoy the Risdaverse stories and novels so much more than like the original Ice Planet Barbarian stories and the expanded universe novels more, because the human characters in them have so much more agency. Sure, you know, I think in the expanded universe the characters' predicaments and their situations, like, they suck more. Their situations are usually pretty dire, even more so than those on the ice planet. But yet somehow these characters seem to have more fulfilling lives. They 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 seem to just make more of what they have. They and I think even more so than like in this story, there's more as the novels kind of develop more, like you see characters progress so much more and find so much more fulfilling substance in what they're doing than in any of the original stories. And let me know if you disagree or agree with me on that point too. But let's talk about Emvor, because I think he is also an interesting character. Because Emvor, when I initially read him, all I could think is he's just so, he was just so unlikable. He comes off as a pouty, stubborn dude who's just kind of dumb, and he has so much super cringy dialogue. I mean, I read a lot of romance stories, and I am not adverse to dialogue that verges on the vulgar side, but the way Emvor talks about like what he wants out of a wife is just plain cringe. Plus, he seems to have no problem solving skills. Like the whole mech issue was really a non-issue because there were so many other options, at least in my mind, that did not even involve having mechs. I think the reason Emvor actually needed a wife was so that he could have someone around to help him function with tasks that were above basic day-to-day survival skills. And to me, that right there is the truth of Emvor. He has trauma too, and he might suffer from something like PTSD, if not PTSD, from the war. And he probably operates in a state of hypervigilance most, if not all of the time. So he sees everything as survival, and this is reality to him. And I know I snarkily gave my solutions for hiring farm hands or wearing a life alert bracelet as possibilities, and I still think that is a good option, especially with his nosy neighbors. But in his state of mind, I can understand his need to protect himself and do only for himself as part of his trauma response. He is super mistrustful of everybody, and we see that in the opening scene, and that is something that is repeated every time he thinks or talks about one of his neighbors, even though there is never a reason given for this mistrust. Like, none of his neighbors have ever done anything to him. They just come around and check on him and invite him to social gatherings. But he sees them as possible threats. And I think that's another reason he wants to have a mail order bride. So it's just transactional and contractual. So trust doesn't really have to be built over time. It's just built into the contract. Because if you're living in a reality where you have to always be on alert and you're always trying to protect yourself from threats, and those threats seem real to you, even though they may not make sense to anyone else, there is no way you could just welcome someone into your life and start building trust with them. Hence the conflict with Emvor and Nicola. So, cringe dialogue aside, Emvor is actually a complex character when you really start to think about his motivations. And maybe that is what this story is really about. Two people who have been through some awful stuff, survived, came out the other side, with trauma looking for someone else to help them navigate the rest of this lifetime. And when you look at Nicola, who has almost no freedom in this universe, her choices are very limited, and yet she is using every resource at her disposal to find some agency for herself. It may not be ideal, but she is being an active participant in forging a future for herself. M4, on the other hand, has all the freedom in the universe. He is not restricted like Nicola, but he limits himself because he lives in a constant state of survival only. He's not making plans for his future. His thinking only extends to how do I keep myself safe? What do I need for that? What will get me to tomorrow? This is hypervigilance, in my opinion. So, as far as the plot, the story is fine. It's a soft enemy to lover story that hits all its major beats, has a satisfying conclusion, and moves at a pretty good pace. It's not very long, and it's an easy read. What I didn't expect to do when writing the script was go into a very critical look at the two main characters. But if I had just told you the plot, this would have been very boring, especially if you had already read the story. When I was thinking about what I liked about Nicola, the fact that she is very practical and that she accepts her situation and adapts to it, and that she is resourceful, I realized that these are qualities that I wish I possessed more of. And when I looked at what I didn't like about Nicola, the fact that she still has love or favorable emotions towards the woman who owned her, who emotionally and physically abused her by calling her stupid, degrading her, hitting her, shaming her, and more, I had to stop and think if I was internalizing some feelings towards my own familial relationships. The same thing goes with Embor. I did not like his character, but did I see the traits like his hypervigilant behaviors and mistrust as things I dislike most about myself? Therefore, I automatically disliked him as a character? Or am I projecting and trying to find a deeper meaning in a sci-fi romance novel about aliens with horns? Maybe that is part of the experience of reading, though, finding a connection between you, the reader, and the character, whether it be good or bad. I did give this story a 2.5 on Goodreads. Please let me know if you've read this story. Did you like it? If you haven't read it, are you going to check it out? Am I way off in my character assessments, or am I projecting all my baggage on these two characters? Let me know in the comments below. If you have made it this far, Thank you so much. Please consider liking and subscribing. I am working on my next video. I have the painting all done. I will be reviewing Pretty Human and talking about the world building that happened in that novella. And until next time, remember to take some time for yourself. Love you, bye.